Welcome to the ecology of an audio environment, or how to find an ecological niche for every instrument in your mix. Much as our environment on Earth has little species that fit every little area in the environment, we need to do the same type of thing for an audio environment. How do we fit a piano and a huge guitar and big drums and, of course, the biggest instrument of all, the electric bass or synthesized bass, into a mix and still be able to understand the vocals and understand each part? There are several ways, but what we need to do is find a niche or a niche for each individual part. Let's take a piano, for example. There are a wide range of musical tones, and the spectrum is huge. Low bottom end, and lots of tinkly top end. But it's usually the bottom end that gives us the most grief, especially if we have a bass. How do we make these two instruments coexist? The notes they play can be in the same exact range, and they may interfere. In fact, they probably will interfere. So what we want to do, what I typically do, is I'll use a low pass filter. And here's why. If I raise the volume of the piano to hear the piano clearly, then I can't hear the bass so much. And then I raise the level of the bass, and then the bass gets loud, but then I can't hear the piano, and the poor vocals just totally get buried, and then we have distortion and mud, and it's just a nasty mess. If you have a low cut filter, put it on your piano. I often start at 100 hertz, sometimes sweep up, clear up to 200 hertz to get rid of that bottom end so the bass has more room to fit. And we're going to talk about basic tools that we have to fit individual instruments into this environment. The first tool we have, of course, are levels. The faders on your mixer or on your software mixer in your DAW. We can raise and lower those to get an overall balance, but often we end up burying the vocals. And on most recordings, vocals are what we want to hear. Unless you're trying to hide them, of course. And there's different ways to hide them. With the example of the piano, if I raise the piano up really loud, I may bury the vocals. An electric guitar, if I raise them up, they just often are in the same exact range as vocals. And that's one way you can hide vocals if they're not so great, is raise your electric guitar. But most of the time, you need to find a niche area for those electric guitars to live. Now, it depends, of course, whether your vocal is singing or not. And often I will have two different tracks. One guitar when the vocals are there, one guitar when the vocals aren't there. And they're EQ'd differently, and I switch back and forth. Or you can automate your mix and have the EQ turn on and off to make them fit. A piano that I have tuned to fit into a super dance mix will not sound very good at all by itself. That sounds very thin and very, very tinny. But when the full mix is going, then you can understand it. You can hear all of the notes. You can hear the articulation. You know what the piano player is trying to do. So our first tool is levels. But number two is equalization, or as we would normally call it, EQ. EQ is similar to a bass and tone control on a stereo system or in your car. You turn the bass, it makes the bass fuller or muddier, depending on the instrument and the instance. Treble will raise the top end. These are simple controls. Most DAWs and mixers have much more sophisticated equalization these days. A parametric EQ, we can sweep the frequency to hone in exactly where we want to either cut or boost. For example, on the piano, we may want to cut right where the vocals are singing, maybe 200 hertz, and bring that down with the parametric EQ. And with the parametric EQ, we have the bell, which is sort of like this, of the EQ, and we can make it very narrow and focus in like a laser beam and move it up and down in the frequency to zero in on the offending frequency. Then we can either boost it up to make it louder, or then cut it. And one of the best techniques is to boost it up, find the bad spot, and then cut it so that we take it out. If we want a broad change, then we change the Q so it's bigger. A high Q is narrow and a low Q is wide. So equalization is what gets us the ability for the frequency response, so we have a little space set aside for each instrument. What if we have a bass player that gets a little unruly and some of his notes are too loud, or a vocalist? They're not level. We use compression or even limiting to minimize the highs and the lows of each performance. To limit the dynamic range so that if they get really loud, it gets squished down so that it's more consistent between quiet notes and loud notes. Now, a good vocalist knows whether to get close to the mic or back off the mic, depending on if they're singing quietly or loudly, but not everyone knows how to do that. And we can ride gain and use compression. Compression also changes the sound, and we often find a compressed signal sounds better anyway. But it all depends on what you want it to sound like. We can use other effects. I'm not sure it helps make a mix clear, but it makes a mix better, is using the time-based effects, delays, reverbs, and then choruses and flangers, and so on. The delay just makes a person feel more confident singing sometimes, or a reverb. Certainly helps moderate the pitchiness that all vocals have. We can either do it with delay, or we can double track the lead vocals, which almost all pop, country, rock records double track their vocals or use pitch correction or a lot of delay and reverb. We talk about levels, trying to find the right levels. We also need to think about using the pan control, moving the signal to the right or to the left speaker or anywhere in between. That can give us a set more space. Sometimes we want the guitar offset just a little bit. Sometimes we like to have two guitars, one this side and one on this side. Two different guitars. It'll widen up the stereo spectrum. Then we won't need as much level to make the mix work. The big lesson to really remember is that if you can't hear something, think about why. What is masking it? What's covering up what you want to hear? Because if raising the level doesn't do the trick for you, you need to figure out what is in the way and move it out to the speaker somewhere else, to the far edge of the speaker to gain a little space. Use EQ, that's sometimes the best tool if you're not going to re-record the source. It's always better to get a good, clean signal that is similar to the sound that you want. When songs go to final mix, the final mixer will make a lot of changes to find space for each and every instrument. And the difference between an unmixed song and one that's just kind of thrown up there with signals not clear and finding their own niche is like night and day. It's always best to find your niche in life. And same with your sounds. If you like this video, tune in. I'm going to have a few more. We'll talk about other aspects of mixing, and we'll have a few examples. Check us out on the link listed right there. Thank you.